might have to turn it up a little bit.
May I approach?
Sure.
There you go. Just heard my phone. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. And good morning. Good morning. Over the course of this trial, you're going to have an opportunity to get to know Jhonny Depp. Not the characters he's portrayed, but the man himself. You will hear from Mr. Depp directly, but you will also hear from his friends, his family, and employees. You will hear from people who have known him for decades. They have seen him at his best, and they have seen him at his worst. And they will tell you, each of them, that he is a kind soul who has never and would never raise a hand to a woman. You will hear that Mr. Depp learned at a very young age how to coexist with an abusive woman. You will learn from Mr. Depp's sister, Christy, and from Mr. Depp that their mother, Betty Sue, lived in a constant state of anger that would boil over daily in vicious words and violence directed at her husband and their children. And you will hear how Mr. Depp, who had the personality of his father, coped with that abuse in the same way his father did. He just took it. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp learned that the best way to deal with violence was to leave, to get away from it. Give her time to cool down. But he never turned his back on his mother. Mr. Depp loved his mother, and he cared for her until the day she died. You will hear how Mr. Depp came to Los Angeles as a teenager. He first planned to be a musician, then became an actor, and eventually, thanks to his talent, his dedication, and a lot of hard work, grew into one of the biggest movie stars in the world. He had relationships with major figures in Hollywood and elsewhere, like Winona Ryder, Kate Moss. And before he met Amber Heard, he was with the same woman, Vanessa Paradis, for 14 years. He had 2 children with her. And even though he was a megastar, they had a quiet, domestic life. In fact, you'll hear, as Mr. Chu already told you, that in Mr. Depp's 58 years, not a single woman has ever accused him of violence. And nobody in Hollywood or the world had any reason to believe he was an abuser, until Ms. Heard publicly accused him in 2016. You're also going to hear evidence about Ms. Heard. You're going to learn that she's a profoundly troubled person who manipulates the people around her just like she manipulated Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard came to Los Angeles and sought a career in acting after Mr. Depp was well established as a movie star. Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard first met in 2009 on the set of the film The Rum Diaries. There was a significant age difference between them, and at first he avoided her advances, but she pursued him. She wooed him. The evidence will show that Ms. Heard went to great lengths to win him over by playing the doting girlfriend. And it worked. He fell head over heels in love with her. Those who watched this relationship develop saw red flags all over the place. You will hear from them in this trial. And over time, the real Miss Heard began to emerge. She would berate him, scream at him. He would try to appease her, and sometimes, just sometimes, things would get better. But it would always happen again. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp started coping with Ms. Heard in the same way he did as a child. He would try to get away, avoid the conflict. But his trying to leave enraged Ms. Heard. she would resort to physical violence, throwing things at him, hitting him. She would tell him he was a coward. She would tell him he wasn't man enough because he wouldn't stay and fight with her. You will see that Miss Heard equated anger and violence with passion. She would apologize with poetic excuses, as if the violence just proved how fierce and overwhelming her love for him was. And you're going to hear that when Miss Heard got violent, Mr. Depp would just retreat, just as he did with his mother. He would try to leave, to get away from her. In her words, Miss Heard's words, he would split. Mr. Depp would often retreat into bathrooms, lock the doors, wait out Miss Heard's aggression, but his leaving just provoked her more. You will hear from Mr. Depp's security people, like Sean Bett, about how they often had to remove Mr. Depp from scenes with Miss Heard, screaming at him, chasing him, trying to keep him from leaving. You're going to hear evidence that when Mr. Depp and Miss Heard traveled together, his team routinely had to book an extra room for him so that he had somewhere to go when Miss Heard became enraged. You'll hear from other witnesses, including Mr. Depp and Miss Heard's marriage counselor. Her name is Dr. Laurel Anderson, who perceived Miss Heard as the aggressor in the relationship. Miss Heard as the aggressor in the relationship, the one who would strike Mr. Depp to try to keep him from leaving. You'll hear from medical professionals who were with Mr. Depp and Miss Heard, often on a daily basis, for years, including their doctor, David Kipper, and Miss Heard's personal nurse, her personal assigned nurse, Erin Baran Falati, who did not see any signs of injuries that Miss Heard later testified to in graphic detail. Miss Heard wants you to ignore the testimony of these medical professionals who saw her in real time, just as she wants you to ignore the testimony of the police officers who testified under oath, who saw her on May 21st, 2016, without any injuries. But it is up to you, ladies and gentlemen of this jury, to judge the credibility of these witnesses and that of Miss Heard.